You're lying in bed at 3 in the morning, your heart racing, your mind spinning through every possible disaster that could happen tomorrow, next week, next year. You've tried everything, the breathing exercises, the meditation apps, the positive affirmations, but nothing seems to work for more than a few minutes. Meanwhile, there are monks living in remote monasteries who experience profound peace despite having nothing, owning nothing, and facing the same uncertain world you do. What do they know that you don't? What ancient wisdom have they discovered that could finally free you from the constant grip of anxiety? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share isn't just theory or philosophy. It's a complete framework for understanding and transcending anxiety that monks have refined over thousands of years. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why your approach to anxiety has been backwards this entire time. Let's start with something that might shock you. Monks don't try to eliminate anxiety. In fact, they don't even see it as the enemy. This is the first fundamental difference between how we approach anxiety and how monks approach it. We treat anxiety like a disease that needs to be cured, a fire that needs to be extinguished, an invader that needs to be expelled. We download apps, we avoid triggers, we try to think positive thoughts, all in an attempt to make the anxiety go away. But monks have discovered something profound through centuries of deep introspection and meditation. They've learned that resistance to anxiety is actually what gives it power. When you fight against anxiety, when you desperately try to make it stop, you're actually feeding it. You're telling your nervous system that there really is something to be afraid of, that the anxiety itself is dangerous. This creates a loop where anxiety triggers resistance, resistance creates more tension, and that tension generates more anxiety. Monks understand that anxiety is not your enemy, it's a messenger. Think about that for a moment. Every single time you feel anxious, your body and mind are trying to tell you something important. Maybe they're telling you that you're living out of alignment with your values. Maybe they're pointing to some deep fear or belief that needs to be examined. Maybe they're simply indicating that you're overwhelmed and need to slow down. But instead of listening to the message, we spend all our energy trying to silence the messenger. It's like having a smoke detector going off in your house, and instead of looking for the fire, you just keep ripping the batteries out of the detector. Monks have learned to befriend anxiety, to get curious about it, to sit with it long enough to hear what it's trying to communicate. This doesn't mean they enjoy feeling anxious or that they're passive about it. It means they've stopped adding suffering on top of suffering by fighting against what is. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Monks have identified something they call the second arrow. This concept comes from Buddhist teachings, and it's absolutely crucial to understanding why your anxiety feels so overwhelming. The Buddha taught that when you're struck by an arrow, that's painful. That's the first arrow. But then, most of us immediately shoot ourselves with a second arrow. We don't just feel anxious, we feel anxious about being anxious. We judge ourselves for it. We think there's something wrong with us. We worry about what it means that we're feeling this way. We catastrophize about the future. We ruminate about the past. Each of these thoughts is another arrow we're shooting at ourselves. The first arrow, the initial feeling of anxiety, might only last a few seconds or minutes if we simply allowed it to be there. But the second arrow, all our thoughts and judgments about the anxiety, can keep us suffering for hours, days, or even years. Monks train themselves to recognize when they're about to shoot that second arrow and to simply stop, not to suppress it or fight it, but to consciously choose not to add extra suffering to an already difficult experience. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. Imagine you wake up and immediately feel a wave of anxiety about a presentation you have to give later that day. That's the first arrow. It's uncomfortable, but it's also natural and temporary. Your body is simply activating its stress response to help you prepare for a challenging situation. But then your mind kicks in. You start thinking, why am I always so anxious? Normal people don't feel like this. I'm going to mess up this presentation. Everyone's going to think I'm incompetent. I'll probably get fired. I can't handle this. What's wrong with me? I should be stronger. This anxiety is going to ruin everything. Each of these thoughts is another arrow. And here's the thing, the original anxiety about the presentation might have actually been useful. It might have motivated you to prepare better or arrived earlier. But all those additional thoughts don't help at all. They just create layer upon layer of unnecessary suffering. Monks have learned to feel the first arrow, acknowledge it, and then resist the temptation to shoot themselves with a dozen more. This brings us to one of the most powerful tools in the monastic approach to anxiety, what they call bare attention or naked awareness. This is the practice of observing your experience without adding anything to it. No judgment, no analysis, no story, no interpretation. Just pure observation. When anxiety arises, instead of immediately jumping into thoughts about it, monks simply notice the physical sensations in their body. They might observe, there's tightness in my chest, there's a flutter in my stomach, there's tension in my shoulders, my breathing is shallow. They notice these sensations the way a scientist might observe phenomena in a laboratory, with interest, but without attachment or aversion. They don't say this tightness in my chest is terrible and it needs to stop right now. They simply note tightness is present. This might sound too simple to be effective, but it's actually incredibly powerful. When you observe anxiety with bare attention, you're no longer identifying with it. You're no longer saying, I am anxious. Instead, you're recognizing anxiety is happening. There's a world of difference between these two statements. One makes anxiety your identity. The other makes it a temporary experience you're witnessing. Monks also understand something about the nature of all experience that most people never realize. Everything, absolutely everything, is impermanent. This isn't just a philosophical idea for them. It's a direct perception they develop through thousands of hours of meditation. They learn to see that every sensation, every emotion, every thought arises, exists for a moment, and then passes away. Nothing lasts. When you're in the grip of anxiety, it feels permanent. It feels like it's always been there and always will be. But monks know from direct experience that if you simply observe anxiety without interfering with it, it will change all by itself. Sometimes it intensifies first, but then it naturally subsides. The feeling you have right now will not be the feeling you have 5 minutes from now, even if you do absolutely nothing. Most people never discover this because they never sit still long enough to watch the natural arising and passing of their experience. They're too busy running away from discomfort or fighting against it. There's a practice that monks do that might sound extreme but is actually one of the most effective techniques for working with anxiety. It's called sitting with the shakiness or staying in the fire. When intense anxiety arises, instead of distracting themselves or trying to calm down, they deliberately turn toward the feeling and allow it to be as intense as it wants to be. They make space for it. They invite it to fully express itself. This sounds counterintuitive because our instinct is always to pull away from pain, to escape discomfort. But monks have discovered that anxiety cannot actually hurt you. The sensation of anxiety, as uncomfortable as it is just energy moving through your body. It's just sensations. When you stop running from it and start allowing it, something remarkable happens. The anxiety often intensifies at first because you're no longer suppressing it. But then, because you're not feeding it with resistance, it begins to lose its power. You realize experientially that you can survive the feeling. You discover that the story your mind was telling you about how unbearable this is was just that, a story. The actual sensation, while unpleasant, is workable. Now, I need to tell you about one of the most profound insights monks have about the root cause of anxiety. They've discovered that at the core of most anxiety is a fundamental misunderstanding about the self. We walk around with this feeling that there's a solid, permanent self that needs to be protected, defended, and maintained. We think, I am this person with these qualities, and I need to make sure everyone sees me the right way and nothing threatens my sense of who I am. But monks, through deep meditation, have discovered that this solid self doesn't actually exist the way we think it does. What we call the self is actually a constantly changing process, a flowing river rather than a fixed rock. When you really examine your experience moment by moment, you can't find this permanent self anywhere. Your thoughts are constantly changing. Your feelings are constantly changing. Your body is constantly changing. Even your beliefs and preferences are constantly changing. So, what exactly is this self you're so worried about protecting? Monks call this insight a natman or no self, and it's incredibly liberating when you begin to see it directly. Because if there's no fixed self to protect, what is there to be anxious about? So much of our anxiety comes from trying to maintain and defend an identity that doesn't exist in the solid way we think it does. Let's talk about something practical now. How do monks structure their entire lives to support mental peace? Because this is crucial. You can have all the insights and techniques in the world, but if your lifestyle is constantly generating anxiety, you're fighting an uphill battle. Monks follow what they call the middle way, which means they avoid extremes. They don't overstimulate themselves with constant entertainment and distraction, but they also don't torture themselves with extreme asceticism. They maintain very regular routines. They wake up at the same time every day. They eat at the same times. They meditate at the same times. This regularity creates a stable container for the mind. Your nervous system thrives on predictability and routine. When your days are chaotic and unpredictable, when you never know what's coming next, your anxiety levels naturally increase. Monks also drastically limit their sensory input. They're not scrolling through social media, binge-watching Netflix, or constantly listening to podcasts. They spend long periods in silence. They limit their conversations. They live in environments with minimal visual clutter and stimulation. This isn't because they're afraid of the world. It's because they understand that constant stimulation keeps the mind agitated. It's like trying to see clearly into a pond while constantly throwing rocks into it. The water never has a chance to settle. Monks also have a completely different relationship with time than most of us do. Think about your typical day. You're constantly rushing from one thing to the next, always running a little behind, always thinking about what's coming next while barely present for what's happening now. You're eating breakfast while mentally rehearsing your morning meeting. You're in that meeting while worrying about the emails piling up. You're answering those emails while anxious about picking up your kids on time. You're with your kids while stressing about the work you didn't finish. You're never fully anywhere, and this divided attention is a massive source of anxiety. Monks practice what they call being time. They give their complete attention to whatever they're doing in this moment. When they're walking, they're fully walking. When they're eating, they're fully eating. When they're meditating, they're fully meditating. There's no sense of rushing to get through one activity to get to the next. Each activity is complete in itself. This doesn't mean they don't plan for the future or learn from the past. It means that when they're planning for the future, they're fully present with the act of planning. And when they're reflecting on the past, they're fully present with the act of reflecting. But most of the time they're simply here now, doing what's in front of them. There's another crucial aspect of monastic life that directly addresses anxiety, and that's the practice of voluntary simplicity. Monks intentionally own very few possessions. They might have a robe, a bowl, maybe a few books, and that's it. This isn't because they think possessions are evil, or because they're trying to punish themselves. It's because they've discovered that every possession you own actually owns a piece of your attention and energy. Every object requires maintenance, creates choices, and generates mental clutter. Think about your own life for a moment. How much of your anxiety is related to maintaining, protecting, organizing, upgrading, or worrying about your possessions? Your car needs repairs. Your house needs cleaning. Your clothes need organizing. Your electronics need updating. Each of these things pulls on your attention and creates little threads of worry. Monks have cut most of these threads. They've discovered that having less doesn't make them feel deprived. It actually creates a profound sense of freedom and lightness. When you own less, you need less money, which means you can work less or worry less about your job. You have fewer decisions to make each day, which preserves your mental energy for things that actually matter. You have less to maintain and organize, which frees up huge amounts of time. Now let's talk about one of the most challenging but important aspects of the monastic approach to anxiety: learning to be comfortable with discomfort. Our entire modern culture is oriented around avoiding discomfort. We have air conditioning so we're never too hot, heating so we're never too cold, endless entertainment so we're never bored, constant snacking so we're never hungry, medications so we never have to feel pain, and social media so we never have to feel alone. We've created a world where we expect to feel comfortable all the time, and then we wonder why we can't handle the inevitable discomforts that life brings. Monks deliberately cultivate discomfort tolerance. They might sit in meditation for hours, even when their body is screaming at them to move. They might fast regularly. They might live in very simple conditions without luxuries. They do this not because they're masochists, but because they're training themselves to be okay when things aren't comfortable. They're expanding their window of tolerance for discomfort. And here's what's fascinating about this. The more comfortable you are with discomfort, the less power discomfort has over you, which means the less anxiety you experience. Because so much of our anxiety is actually just the fear that we won't be able to handle feeling uncomfortable. We're not really afraid of public speaking. We're afraid we won't be able to handle the discomfort of feeling nervous in front of people. We're not really afraid of being alone. We're afraid we won't be able to handle the discomfort of loneliness. When you know from direct experience that you can sit with intense discomfort and be okay, that fear loses its grip on you. Monks also have a practice that directly addresses one of the biggest sources of modern anxiety, the comparing mind. We constantly compare ourselves to others. She's more successful than me, he's happier than me, they have more money, more friends, a better relationship, a nicer house. This constant comparison is absolutely toxic to peace of mind. Monks practice what they call mudita, which is often translated as sympathetic joy or appreciative joy. It's the practice of feeling genuinely happy when others experience success or happiness. Instead of seeing someone else's success as a comment on your own inadequacy, you train yourself to feel joy for them. This might sound impossible if you're not used to it, but it's actually a skill that can be developed. Monks practice it by deliberately calling to mind people who are happy or successful and intentionally generating feelings of happiness for them. At first, this might feel fake or forced, but over time, it becomes natural. And what's remarkable is that when you stop seeing other people's happiness as a threat to your own, when you stop keeping score and comparing, a huge source of anxiety just evaporates. Let me tell you about another powerful monastic practice for working with anxiety that you can start using immediately. It's called labeling or noting. This is a simple technique where you mentally label your experience as it's happening. When you notice you're thinking about the future, you simply note planning or worrying. When you notice you're thinking about the past, you note remembering or ruminating. When you notice physical sensations, you note feeling or sensing. When emotions arise, you note what they are: fear, sadness, anger, joy. This practice serves multiple purposes. First, it keeps you anchored in present moment awareness instead of getting lost in your thoughts. Second, it creates a little bit of distance between you and your experience. You're not the anxiety, you're the one noticing and labeling the anxiety. Third, it helps you see patterns in your mind. You might realize that you spend 70% of your mental energy worrying about the future, and only 5% actually present with what's happening now. That awareness itself can be transformative. There's something else that monks understand about anxiety that completely changes how you work with it, and that's the concept of the gap. In between every thought, there's a tiny gap. In between every sensation, there's a gap. In between every breath, there's a gap. These gaps are moments of pure awareness without content, moments where anxiety doesn't exist because no thought or sensation is present to carry it. Most people never notice these gaps because their attention is so captured by the content of their experience. But monks train themselves to notice and rest in these gaps, and what they discover is that these gaps are actually your natural state. The peace you're seeking isn't something you need to create or achieve. It's already there in the gaps between your thoughts. Anxiety exists in the content of your thinking. Peace exists in the space around and between your thoughts. When you start noticing these gaps and learning to rest in them, even for a fraction of a second, you begin to access a dimension of peace that's always available, regardless of what's happening in your life. Now I want to address something that might be bothering you. You might be thinking, this all sounds great, but I can't become a monk. I have a job, a family, responsibilities. I live in the modern world, not in a monastery. This is completely valid, and it's important to understand that you don't need to become a monk or radically change your entire life to benefit from monastic wisdom about anxiety. What you can do is extract the principles and adapt them to your life. You can create small pockets of monastery in your daily routine. Maybe you start your day with 20 minutes of meditation instead of immediately checking your phone. Maybe you eat one meal a day in complete silence, fully present with the experience of eating. Maybe you have one room in your house that's kept very simple and clutter-free where you can go to find peace. Maybe you implement a digital sunset, where all screens go off 2 hours before bed. Maybe you simplify one area of your life by getting rid of things you don't need. Maybe you practice noting your thoughts for just 5 minutes a day. The point isn't to perfectly replicate monastic life. The point is to understand the principles they've discovered about how the mind works and how anxiety operates, and then to apply those principles in whatever way fits your life. Let me share one more crucial insight that monks have about anxiety. They understand that trying to control everything is not just impossible, it's the very thing that creates anxiety. Think about what happens when you try to control a situation. You create an expectation of how things should be. Then reality unfolds in its own way, which is often different from your expectation. This gap between expectation and reality creates suffering. You feel disappointed, frustrated, anxious. You try harder to control things. You create more rigid expectations. The gap widens. The suffering increases. Monks practice what they call letting go or non-attachment. This doesn't mean they don't care about outcomes or that they're passive. It means they do what's within their power to do, and then release their grip on how things turn out. They understand deeply that there are thousands of things outside their control, and maybe just a handful of things within their control. They focus their energy on those few things and develop peace with everything else. When you really internalize this, when you stop trying to control things that can't be controlled, an enormous burden lifts. You're no longer anxious about all the ways things might go wrong because you've accepted that they might go wrong, and that you'll deal with it if they do. As we come to the end of this exploration of what monks know about anxiety, I want to emphasize the most important insight of all. Monks have discovered that peace is not something you achieve by controlling your circumstances, by having the perfect life, or by eliminating all sources of stress and anxiety. Peace is something you discover by changing your relationship to your experience. It's possible to feel anxious sensations in your body and still be at peace. It's possible to have worried thoughts in your mind and still be at peace. The peace is not found in the absence of difficulty. It's found in the space of awareness that holds all difficulty. When you stop identifying with your anxiety, when you stop seeing it as an enemy or a problem or a sign that something's wrong with you, when you simply allow it to be a temporary visitor in the vast space of your awareness, everything changes. You realize that you are not your anxiety. You are the awareness in which anxiety appears and disappears. And that awareness has never been disturbed, has never been damaged, has never been less than completely whole and complete, regardless of what thoughts or feelings have passed through it. This is what monks discover through their practice, and it's available to you too. The anxiety will likely still come and go throughout your life, but it doesn't have to be a problem anymore. It can just be weather passing through the sky of your awareness, and you can remain as the sky, vast, spacious, and fundamentally undisturbed.